Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar and thanks for your time. I wanted to briefly introduce myself and our organization. I'm Chi and I'm part of ITS Washington. We are a professional organization established in 1996 that serves as a nexus for collaboration. So we provide members that are consisted of different public, private sector, vendors, and university members with professional development and networking opportunities while advocating for transportation technology solutions and greater accessibility for all. So before we get started, I want to mention an upcoming event planned in tandem with today's webinar. So led by King County Metro's Zero Emission team, we will be touring their South Base facility on August 15th, which will showcase the impact of battery electric buses on public transit, and the charging facility is responsible for powering the current fleet of electric buses and plays a vital role in the agency's plan to achieve 100% zero emissions by 2035. So spots are limited and we are opening it to the attendees of the webinar first. The registration link will be placed in chat if you are interested in attending. And also, if you did want to stay in touch with ITS Washington news and events, we do have a newly launched LinkedIn page, so make sure to follow that. And we will also have that linked below. So without further ado, I will hand the mic off to Jeff Owen, who will be moderating the webinar today to introduce himself and our wonderful panelists.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chi. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today and to bring together a wonderful panel that has a lot of experience in zero emissions vehicles at transit agencies and in transit applications. So what we'll be doing today is going through three different presentations. As you can see on the screen, we have sample images there from King County Metro, Pierce Transit, and C-Tran. And we'll be hearing from our presenters a little bit about their latest efforts, some of their lessons learned, and we will be, at the end, having time for discussion and answering questions that you may have. So please do be thinking of questions as we go, and we are happy to make sure and have a chance to talk through any questions and answers among the panel. So as we mentioned, we'll have a couple of slides at the front here that help to make sure and bring in a little bit of common themes and sort of some base knowledge about zero emissions buses. And then we'll turn it over to our presenters and have time for discussions at the end. So myself, hello, I'm Jeff Owen. I am a mobility project manager at HDR. And I've had the pleasure of working directly with all three of our presenters today. Carly with King County Metro, Tina, and we'll also have Nathan Grow as well with Pierce Transit, and Tim Shellenberger with C-Tran. So these individuals have all been and continue to be kind of in the weeds with each agency, testing zero emissions vehicles, and learning and planning and looking for funding and all the good things that we know we have to do. So just a couple of slides before I turn it over to our first presenter. As the presenters cover their material, we will be touching in some order on these common themes. The first one that I wanted to highlight is we're really in a period of time now where just a few years ago, the energy and the purpose of experimenting and testing some of these vehicles at transit agencies was to do a pilot, to apply for funding, to get a couple of buses, run a pilot, test out the waters, kind of see how it's going, and then report back and think about bigger purchases after that. And we really have moved as an industry away from just doing a pilot. And for example, really needing to be able to show FTA and others, the Federal Transit Administration, that there's a plan in place, that we're not just doing a pilot and we're thinking about it, but we really have thought more long-term. So each of the panelists will, talk a little bit about how these efforts fit into their overall goals, not just simply, let's get a bus and try it out. The second bullet, infrastructure development. This new technology basically equates to really needing to make some upgrades in infrastructure. So that's both at the base or the garage where buses are refueled, typically where they're maintained, where they go for the night, upgrades are needed not only there at the bases or the garages, but also perhaps on the route. And so the presenters will talk through that as well. In the vehicle fleet transition kind of category or theme, again, as we're moving away from pilots, some of the buses that agencies might try in the early days of pilots may not really fit their needs for routes or blocks and scheduled service. So the transition they each might refer to really takes a closer look at making sure these new vehicles really fit the need that the agency has. And then maintenance facilities, again, is there an ability to just make upgrades and modify buildings or facilities that the transit agency has, or are they really looking at needing a completely new facility? Going down the list for workforce training with new vehicles, there is a bit to learn from mechanics and all kinds of service angles. So there's a need that has been in place and will continue into the future to train current staff, to train them about the new vehicles, the new technologies, and to think into the future to make sure that we are collectively as an industry training and retraining for the future workforce to work on these vehicles that are so critical to service in our communities. And then finally, the operational considerations. So as the buses are in use, there are challenges that arise, and each of our presenters will touch on some of their challenges and what they're doing to overcome those challenges. So at a high level, there's really two main types of zero emission bus vehicle types. So on the left, we have a fuel cell electric bus, and on the right, a battery electric bus. One could say that they're both, in a sense, a battery electric bus. The fuel cell kind of adds in that extra capability. So it's a bit of a new technology for sure. And so there's a lot to kind of go through, but at a high level, there's a little bit of commonality between the vehicles, with the exception of the fuel cell being the actual power supply system difference there. So we'll talk that through just a touch more. For a battery electric bus, and we'll do the same next for fuel cell, there are benefits and challenges to keep in mind. So the benefits of a battery electric bus, of course, we're looking at zero tailpipe emissions. So this is a helpful piece of different communities, all of our climate goals. There's potential for lower fuel cost, and that does depend on electricity rates for each agency, and they might touch on that as well. Battery electric buses are quiet. Quite a different experience for a rider when you're on the bus, and for passengers or community members who might live along the line or work in a building next to a bus stop and a bus route. There's potential for lower maintenance costs when you take out that complex engine. And so there's a lot of benefits there to be realized. However, there are some higher capital costs. Battery electric buses currently do have some range limitations, and so each of our presenters will touch on kind of their experience in using battery electric buses on some of the routes. And so what that means is, if you can't quite have the same range, you can't quite have a one-to-one bus replacement. So we'll talk that through a bit more, but if you can't have a bus do the same range that a diesel bus or a CNG bus or other technology has, then you're looking at having to buy more buses or figure out a different solution along the route. A battery on a battery electric bus does degrade over time. And so that day one capacity, that day one range does get a little lower over time. It is a little more complex, and we'll talk that through as well more. And significant power upgrades might be required when you're looking at the full fleet. Again, if you're doing a pilot, you can probably figure that out with just one or two buses, but as you start to transition, it's a lot of power that needs to be really explored alongside the electric utility. So three main types of bus charging. On the left, we have charging at the depot, at the base, the garage. Those are kind of interchangeable terms. That tends to be a little bit slower. In terms of fast charging, on the middle, on the right, there's two main types. Above would be fast charging that's conductive, and below There are several models out there now where the bus pulls over the charging pad and is recharged from below. So we'll talk those through as well in the different presentations. For a hydrogen fuel cell bus, again, there's a lot of similarity: zero tailpipe, quiet operations, potential for lower maintenance costs. The operations of the bus and the fueling is more similar to diesel, so quicker to fuel the bus. And there are, of course, there's some range limitations in the sense of how much it can hold, but you're looking much closer towards a one-to-one replacement with your existing operations. So basically, it's the same type of a bus, but just adds that hydrogen fuel cell extender. So there are some higher upfront costs. The vehicles themselves are a little more expensive. Depending on the type of hydrogen fuel that goes into the vehicle, it could be difficult to procure the type of hydrogen you might want. Typically, we're aiming for green hydrogen. And there's more limited operating experiences that are in place. The delivery of hydrogen can be either kind of by truck and tank in two main forms, either coming to your site as liquid or as gaseous. And so both can work. There's some pros and cons there on the screen to each. There's also potential to do on-site production. But when you look at the expense and the space and what's required for on-site production, you're probably looking at already going through quite a bit of planning and really hanging your hat on having a larger volume of hydrogen fuel cell buses that you're looking to charge. So my last slide here before turning it over to our first presenter, I just wanted to give you a very brief overview of each of the three agencies we'll hear from today. So in the Seattle metro area is King County, over 2,000 square miles of a service area, so a very large area, over 800 buses in service, and began some of that initial testing in 2015 with Proterra buses. Currently with about 44 buses with several on order, and so Carly will fill us in just over 50 by the end of summer. For Pierce Transit in the Tacoma kind of area, we have almost 300 square miles of service, over 100 buses in service. And Pierce began testing with nine BEBs, battery electric buses. 3 of those are Proterra, 6 Gilligs. Those are the manufacturers of the bus. And so there's 3 more in order, so that'll take Pierce up to 12 very soon when they're delivered. And for C-Tran at the southwest part of Washington, in the Vancouver area, over 100 square miles in service, just under 100 buses in service. Began with 10 battery electric buses, and so 10 on property. So with that, I want to pass the presentation over to our first presenter, over to Carly. Take it away, Carly.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I guess I'll just introduce myself really briefly. So Jeff referenced that he had worked with me in the past. So I will say I'm relatively new to King County Metro. Been in my position as a zero emission strategic planning manager for, I think, roughly 4 months. Was working at HDR prior to this new position. And I actually had the opportunity to work with Jeff, Tina, and Tim. So this is an amazing group that we've gathered here today. But I can give you an overview of King County Metro and what we're doing, but I'm happy to answer more questions later on. And I actually saw the question in the chat about our trolley buses, and I will talk about that. So we can go to the next slide. So I think I didn't catch Jeff's number. It said like roughly 800 buses. That might have been like the number of standard buses we have in operation on a daily basis, but overall we have over 1,400 buses, including all of our spares and the different sizes of buses. So we do have a very large fleet. We are one of the top 10 largest transit agencies in the country. So it is a very ambitious goal to transition our entire fleet to zero emission. And beyond our bus fleet, we are looking at transitioning every other type of vehicle and even vessel with our marine division to be zero emission. So that includes our van pool, our cutaway kind of pure transit service, our water taxis, and non-revenue vehicles. And we're serving, and I think I've got some like pre and post, well, yeah, I think this is pre-COVID, but We do have a very large ridership base and a large service area, which you saw in that prior slide. So you can move to the next one. So just a little bit of background, I think we all understand mostly why we're doing this, but at a national level, transportation is one of the main contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And then if you look at the Washington kind of side-by-side pie chart, it's even a greater proportion. And although transit is a very small part of that, I think, can make a difference on multiple fronts by having, an option for people to not drive internal combustion engines and get on transit instead, but then at the same time making that transit fleet zero emission. So if you go to the next slide, it is a very tiny slice that transit is contributing to emissions for the transportation sector. And this is not meant to say that we shouldn't be spending our time doing this. I think it's still incredibly important. And we're actually setting the stage for other heavy duty applications to go zero emission. So in some ways, we're kind of testing out that technology, and the trucking industry and other heavy duty transportation is going to benefit from some of the learnings that we have. So I think transit can make an impact on multiple fronts in terms of reducing emissions, for our communities to improve air quality, but also, greenhouse gas emissions in general. So you can go to the next one. So based on our 2020 Strategic Climate Action Plan, we have some really ambitious goals to transition our fleet to zero emission. So not only our bus fleet, but also all the rest of our vehicles. So we're aiming to have a 100% zero emission bus fleet by 2035. We're actually pushing towards having a large percentage of our ADA paratransit vehicles be zero emission by 2030. Also looking at light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty vehicles with various deadlines. But we really want to, have ambitious goals. This is not going to be an easy process, but we understand the urgency of this issue and the need for our fleet to be zero emission as soon as possible. Obviously, still working around some of the market conditions to see what types of vehicles are available. For buses, we actually have some pretty good options, but for some of these other vehicles, it's going to be a bit more of a challenge. I would say especially that paratransit and kind of cutaway vehicle type is going to be challenging. We're also aiming to have chargers at our park and rides for our passengers that are driving and parking. So to encourage, even when you are driving to connect to transit, hopefully you're able to be zero emission all the way through that trip. So next slide kind of speaks to a different aspect of that Strategic Climate Action Plan. We also recognize the need to kind of put our investments in communities that have had a disproportionate burden from air pollution. So that's one of the main reasons that we started our south-based test facility in that southern region of the county, because we did see that is an area that has more impact from air pollution. And so if we can deploy those vehicles where they're needed first, I think we can start having that positive impact on our community immediately. So we are trying to have environmental justice and equity really lead the decisions that we make and how we deploy these vehicles. Obviously, by 2035, every community in King County will have zero emission vehicles, but we do recognize that we want to transition our fleet in a really kind of thoughtful way in kind of representing our values. So this is just a little bit of an overview of what our transition will look like. So you can see it's completed in 2035. I think maybe the next slide kind of speaks to this, but our electric trolley buses are really the foundation of our zero emission transition. They are 100% zero emission. It's not usually something that people talk about. I know Jeff did an excellent introduction about kind of the two primary zero emission vehicle types. Trolley buses aren't typically included in that because it's a huge upfront investment to put in a trolley system with all the catenary wires. So you don't see a lot of agencies putting in new systems. But for those agencies that already have trolley buses, it's a fantastic way to really help you reach your zero emission goals. So King County plans to maintain our trolley bus system and then expand it as we can, because it is quite an investment to really electrify those new lines and putting in all that catenary wire. Off the top of my head, I think it was like over $1 million per mile to do a new trolley bus line. And I will double check those numbers if anyone's curious about the exact numbers. But we can go to the next slide here. So I just want to kind of cover some of the past milestones that we've had. So Metro is one of the first agencies to adopt diesel hybrids. So even though they do have emissions, I think we're really proud of transitioning away from 100% diesel as early as we did. In 2015, we bought our fleet of modern trolley buses, which is, if you count those as zero emission vehicles, then King County Metro has one of the largest zero emission fleets in the country with those 174 trolley buses. In 2015/2016, we deployed our first few battery electric buses as our pilot program. So that is a bit on the early side, those early adopters. And we have a lot of interesting lessons learned from those buses, partially because they did not meet a standard at that time. So they have blade chargers, which are not really in use anymore. So that was a tough lesson to learn. And then in 2017, we made that firm commitment to transition our fleet to 100% zero emission. And we are committed to powering that fleet with renewable energy. 2018/2019, we kind of did a secondary pilot program. So instead of purchasing the buses like we did with the Proterra fleet, we wanted to check out multiple manufacturers and see how they compared and kind of have them operate in our system and collect a lot of important data. In 2020, we retired our last diesel bus. So kind of in 2004, we started that transition and completed it in 2020, which was really exciting. In 22, we commissioned our test facility at South Base, which I mentioned before, and that has the 40 bus fleet of new Flyer buses, which we're getting the last few of those by the end of the summer. And then we are currently in the process of procuring between 60 and 90 battery electric buses that'll be delivered in 2025. So a lot has already happened, but if you go to the next slide, this is kind of what's up next for us. So we're currently in that stage of kind of our South Base test facility. We're working with a much larger fleet now that's just been delivered within the last year. We're learning a lot, and we're still doing some studies. So you can see we have this transit system electrification study going on. So although we already have quite a large fleet, we are still doing some of that planning process, especially around how we're going to transition our bases. So our first base to open in 2025 is our interim base, which is actually a new base that's going to help us expand our capacity while we're transitioning our existing bases. So it just gives us a bit more space to redistribute or kind of shuffle around our fleet as we need to close down different parts of our bases. And that new base is going to support 120 battery electric buses. We're also looking at putting in layover charging right now in various parts of the county, and that'll be completed sometime between 26 and 28. And then in 28, we are going to be opening our South Annex base, which is another new base. So that'll bring our current base, or our current number of bases is 7, and it'll bring us up to 9 with interim and South Annex. And South Annex will be able to support 250 battery electric buses. So these are our big projects that are happening right now, but there's a ton more going on to get us to that 2035 deadline. So I'll try not to take too much longer, and I'm happy to answer questions if I don't get to anything. But We've had a lot of, you know, challenges and risks that we've been managing through this transition. Jeff mentioned, you know, workforce training and recruitment. That's always, you know, that's really been a challenge even without the electrification part of our program. But it is really great that FTA is funding, you know, agencies to really expand that training program, especially for battery electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell buses if you have those. We have been struggling with some cost overruns, just partially because of inflation, but also just the demand for a lot of agencies wanting to transition their bases and needing similar equipment like transformers and other electrical equipment. Partner agency coordination has been incredibly important. For me, being new to the Seattle area, this has been a really interesting part of the program. And we've actually been working closely with Pierce Transit. And even though C-Tran is down in Vancouver, I think there is a lot of interest in the state to really share lessons learned and coordinate as we can. Our partner utilities are Seattle City Light and Puget Sound Energy, and we're working closely with them. That is a challenging process because we're trying to figure out exactly how much power we need, and it's not always easy to estimate, you know, up to 10 years in advance. Supply chain is a common issue for a lot of agencies. And then standards and interoperability has been challenging. I think the standards have been improving, but one major concern we have is around inductive charging right now, where there are some of our partners that we have shared facilities with are looking at inductive charging, and there's not yet a standard. So it can lead to some challenging conversations in figuring out how do you deploy new technology? How do you work together if you do have any kind of shared facilities? I think it's not something you can't overcome, but it does lead to some complexity. I think I might just skip to the next slide. So, and we can answer further questions on this, but so I will say I'm part of the American Public Transportation Association. I'm the chair of the Zero Emission Fleet Committee, which we kind of talk about zero emission buses all day long. So it's a great group to be a part of in addition to ITS. But, you know, there are a lot of issues that every agency is dealing with across the country. So that limited range, the space requirements, which we're dealing with by having new bases, power availability, resiliency is a major concern. How much do we need to do to make sure that we can maintain power for charging? Doing that charging management to maintain or control your electricity costs. Thermal events, so battery electric bus fires are a very scary topic, but something that is definitely we're able to kind of handle that challenge, but we all need to work together on that. So I guess with that, I left maybe some questions in there, which I'm happy to talk about further, but I do want to hand it off, I believe, to Pierce Transit is next up.
Thanks, Carly. Yes, my name is Tina Lee. I am Pierce Transit's planning manager, and we also have Nathan Groh, who is our zero emission fleet coordinator. We're going to tag team. Go ahead and go to the next one, Nathan. And just some context on Pierce Transit. We are in Pierce County. We serve about 70% of Pierce County, and pretty large service area. We provide the local transit to 13 cities and towns in the county, and we have 4 different modes. Go ahead and go to the next slide of service that we operate. And primarily it's the local bus service, and just under 5 million boardings last year. Van pool, just under 400,000 trips last year as well. And then we have our shuttle paratransit, which is our ADA service, and Runner is our newest mode, and it's our on-demand service. Think of transportation network type style service. Most of our work so far on the zero emission bus has been focused on the bus and that transition, but we are also working on that van pool and paratransit, and we'll have just a little bit of information there. And you can see our staffing, primarily most of our staff is dedicated to getting those services on the road, so operations and maintenance. go ahead and go to the next slide. And for Pierce Transit, we do have what we call our Executive Order 1. That was our focus, and we talk about that in our plan, and it guides our transition. So our near-term goal is at 20% electrification of our revenue fleet, which is our bus fleet primarily, by 2030. But as we were on this journey in developing our plan, we did want a long-term goal, and we're severely impacted by how do you afford to do this? And I think that's one of the things you're going to hear from all of us. So we do want to get to 100% revenue fleet as soon as financially possible. And we anticipate we'll be updating that as we learn more about the funding that's available to support these transitions. But right now, our focus has been that 20%. And this is where I'm going to hand it off to Nathan.
Great, thanks, Tina. So again, my name is Nathan Groh. I'm our Zero Emissions Fleet Coordinator here at Pierce Transit, and I'll kind of dive into the details of our operations here. So when we were looking at our long-term zero emissions plan, when it came to battery electric buses and using depot charging and en-route charging, we found that if we were to utilize both of those charging methods, we would have a very small increase both in non-revenue hours and miles, as well as a small increase in the total fleet size that would be required. But the biggest takeaway on this screen is the number of en-route chargers that would be required that are very expensive to implement, and there's a lot of logistics to figure out as well. But in the near term, our focus is on battery electric buses. And for the long term, we might, or we have the option to pivot to fuel cell or hydrogen buses around 2028, 2029. That long-term decision has not been made yet, but at least up until 2029, we're going to be focusing on battery electric buses. And you can see right now that the majority of our bus fleet is compressed natural gas, which kind of helps us on the emissions side, but we do have a very small fleet of diesel hybrids as well. This is looking at our proposed transition and the timeline when it comes to buses. So as we mentioned earlier, we have 9 existing battery electric buses. 3 additional buses are on or will be on order and expected to be delivered next year. That's part of an FTA Lono award that we were awarded in 2022 last year. And after that, we'll order 2 additional battery electric buses in 2025, 2026, and then a few more in 27 and 28. Again, noting that the long-term plan has not been set into place as to whether we would continue ordering battery electric buses or hydrogen buses. And when we first developed our transition plan, we assumed that we would have 32 battery electric buses in operation by 2028, and that would require significant grant funding being awarded to us in order to achieve that. But in the meantime, without additional outside grant funding, we'd be looking at 23 buses, total battery electric buses in the near term. And on the right of the screen, of course, you can see just a long-term view of the total number of, the total percentage of CNG, gasoline, diesel, and electric buses for the long term if we were to continue on the battery electric bus route. And when it comes to chargers, again, you have depot chargers and en-route fast chargers that can be implemented at various transit centers in your service area. And right now, we have a few depot chargers that are a little bit slower when it comes to battery electric buses. As we transition to faster depot chargers, you can see the number of chargers required ramps up over time. And right now we do have a plan in place to implement en-route fast chargers beginning around the 2026-2027 timeline, which I'll dive into a little bit more detail. So for en-route chargers, we are currently installing one 180 kilowatt charger at our Commerce Street Transit Center, while knowing that in the future we're going to need more power capacity there. But our initial transit center that we would install en route chargers would be our Lakewood Transit Center. And this chart here gives you an overview at just how much energy is required just for our small operation compared to King County Metro, and the number of years that it really takes to get a lot of this kicked off and going in order to implement a fully battery electric fleet. You can see that there's a high number of chargers, a high energy capacity need, and like I mentioned earlier, a lot of this is expensive and takes time to implement. This here is giving you an idea of what our base will look like here in the future if we implemented a lot of depot charging. So this is a conceptual design here of a gantry system with overhead pantograph charging. Right now at the bottom, the yellow portion titled plug-in charging, that's where our bus chargers and our battery electric buses currently sit. But in the future, as we plan to get more battery electric buses, we would switch to some sort of overhead charging system. And this here is a conceptual design of one of our transit centers, the Lakewood Transit Center, that we would begin to electrify in 2025 and have it operational by 2027. And you can see how much of a significant jump just having this one transit center electrified for en-route charging gives to our fleet, because this would support a fleet of up to 49 battery electric buses, while we only have 9 in operation right now. So you can really see the significance of what en-route charging does for transit agencies here locally and across the nation, and why it's so important. And when it comes to hydrogen fueling, this is a conceptual design of what our base might look like if we were to switch to hydrogen, again, possibly pivoting to that in 2028, but not completely decided yet. We would have to truck in hydrogen, and you can see that our operation would use quite a bit of gaseous hydrogen, and we would need at least 2 fuel dispensers. And you can see that this would take up a significant portion of the lot on the left-hand side. We would use some, or we would lose some bus parking spaces. And so this is a challenge not just for our agency, but other agencies across the nation that are space constrained. And I keep mentioning the cost of these. So if we were to not make any change and only procure compressed natural gas buses moving forward, over our long-term plan, we'd spend about $400 million. And if we were to adopt either a long-term battery electric bus plan or a long-term hydrogen bus plan, you can see that our capital costs increase significantly, with the long-term battery electric bus plan costing about $160 million more than our baseline. And hydrogen buses, as Jeff mentioned earlier, are even more expensive than battery electric buses, and that would cost about $280 million more than our typical CNG baseline. So this, I would argue, is one of the most the biggest challenge to implementing a fully zero emission bus fleet. Capital costs definitely outside of logistics and charging. I'll pass it back to Tina to wrap us up here.
Just to wrap up, we do plan to be at a fleet of 12 battery electric buses by next year. And we are in construction right now, as Nathan said, on that Commerce station charging. So that'll be, it's one of our primary facilities in downtown Tacoma. That'll give us a little capacity to keep expanding where we can operate these vehicles and which routes and which part of Pierce County can benefit from these types of fleets. We haven't really talked much about van pools, but we did begin to pilot hybrid Pacifica van pools in 2019. And we did that in a partnership with Tacoma Public Utilities because they have chargers at their facility. So it was a really great way to just start testing that. But just this week at our board meeting, our board approved the purchase of Tesla van pools and relief vehicles. And we're pretty excited because we think we'll draw a lot of interest. The cost comparison is right there with what we would buy for other van pools. So it's a really smart way to go. But we'll be bringing in some Tesla van pools and also some of our what we call non-revenue or those relief vehicles also. In the next few years, where we're looking is continue to try to identify that funding to keep growing and working our plan that we've developed along with HDR and our team. We have a grant that we're working on bringing in right now with the state. It's a green transportation grant. And what that's going to do is allow maintenance and planning to work together and begin to do that preliminary design of those transit centers that Nathan mentioned. And then also that we are working on our 6-year financial plan to identify the funding so that we can achieve that Lakewood Transit Center charging and continue to roll out more of the fleet. Those partnerships with the utility is incredibly important, and we can talk about some of those challenges, but we've learned a lot in just that ongoing coordination. And I know as I've gone to conferences and talked with our partners, that's the thing they stress the most is talk to your utilities early and often and really build those relationships. And then lastly, for us, that 2029 year is going to be pivotal. We're really tuned in and continue to watch what's happening in that fuel cell technology and that hydrogen field so that we can really determine, is that the right way that we should go? Or do we continue on and have a primarily battery electric bus fleet? So a lot of work still happening, a lot of planning, and continuing to monitor the industry. With that, we're going to hand it off to Tim and learn about CT's efforts, or C-Tran, sorry.
All right, again, my name is Tim Shellenberger. I know we're getting pressed for time. I am with C-Tran, the Chief Maintenance Officer, been here a little over 25 years. We are just dipping our toes into zero emission, but at C-Tran, we've been really trying to reduce our carbon footprint with hydrogen fuel cell exhaust after treatment products on our existing fleet, which we'll go over. Again, we serve over 400,000 people within our community, a little over 400 fixed route miles. So we do put up miles within our general service boundary, serving the urban growth boundary of Vancouver, Washington, the Vancouver, with 6 additional cities and some rural communities as well. We have 106 fixed route buses total. 2 of those are body on chassis shopping shuttles. It's a special service. So really 104 fixed route buses to provide those service route miles. We serve local commute and commuter over to Portland. And then we also have a BRT line that went in 2017. We have another BRT line on our Mill Plain that's going to have a grand opening and go into service October 1st of this year, which we're really looking forward to. And then when we start talking about some of our zero emission bus efforts and transitioning, the 3rd BRT line, which is scheduled to open in the next couple of years, it'll be our 3rd BRT line. We will introduce 60-foot articulated buses, fuel cell powered. We also serve ADA paratransit. We have 64 of those vehicles serving our paratransit needs. We also have 11 vehicles for our microtransit, that on-demand type of transit Uber, if you will. It's been extremely successful in serving our community and our passengers. And currently, with the impact of COVID, we did suffer some revenue loss on our van pools. It is slowly starting to build back up. We have 14 of those vehicles in service at this time. I don't think I have control anymore. Okay. Can we go back one, please? Oh, the slide didn't get in. What I do want to talk about is C-Tran, before the near-term strategy. C-Tran has been with practicing interdisciplinary planning. We've been really looking at our partners in crime as far as other transit authorities. King County Metro, we've been very close partners with, and other transit properties across the nation to see their trials and errors of They're pilot bus programs, and it really matched our milestones as far as bus transitioning, bus replacements following our existing TAM plan. Because we did, one of our efforts is to fully employ the TAM plan on our useful life benchmarking of our buses. So that has been extremely helpful in determining, okay, when do we do the feasibility study? What works for Clark County? What works for our community? Not just from a fiscal responsibility, but also for the passengers that are going to ride the bus. So that was extremely helpful. We had early talks, and I heard Carly and Tina mention this too. We had very early talks with our public utilities. Our public utilities is Clark PUD, and currently they just upped their efforts on that upstream renewable energy. So we're fortunate to where we live in Southwest Washington, where it is 80% renewable hydroelectric energy that is produced for our community, with the other compressed natural gas. But they are even asserting their efforts on their electricity on how they produce it to also lower that carbon footprint. So they've been an extreme help for us when we ventured into zero emission. So in 2023, and as a matter of fact, June 1st of 2023, we did deploy 10 battery electric buses. They are 40 footers, and the technology and the bus manufacturers continue to change. And so the 10 battery electric buses that we did purchase has the Cummins propulsion system in there, and it is now no longer used with the Gillig buses. So Cummins has already pulled out. So that was a concern for us, lessons learned. We did deploy 4 depot chargers at our main 65th campus here. It is sequential charging, it's charge point. And we also placed chargers at depot chargers, plug-in chargers at 2 of our transit centers. In 2024, we're not going to have any deployments. And in 2025, our transition plan that was adopted by our board in December of 2022 will deploy 22 fuel cell electric buses. And that also has to incorporate, obviously, the hydrogen storage and fueling infrastructure. Go ahead, Jeff. So in our zero emission bus transition plan, we wanted to make it essentially a working document so that we can assess the technologies, because again, the technologies are changing. It's just evolving so quickly. So this does show 2 different scenarios. So in 2025, you can see that those 22 buses that we will be replacing with fuel cell battery electric buses, 14 of those would be the 60-foot articulated buses to support our BRT lines that I mentioned earlier. And then in 26, 27, we can actually take a look at, do we go with battery electric? Do we wait a little bit? Or do we continue to go with hydrogen fuel cell? Next slide. And this shows the charger deployment plan. If we did choose in our long-term planning to go with battery electric bus, these would be the depot chargers and en-route chargers from gantry to plug-in of what that would also look like. Next slide. This is an aerial shot of our campus. So where it shows the 22 buses, that is our current, we call Electric Avenue. We have our plug-in chargers there that was fully commissioned in December of last year. They are fully functional. We have a lot of construction going on at C-Tran, so we had to improvise, and where it shows those cars parked is now currently a construction site. So we had to approach those chargers from the back end. We're making it work for now. And if we did go full battery electric, it does show our gantry type chargers, drop down chargers that we would install on our campus. And we have 3 transit centers within our community, and those would be pantograph type chargers that we would also implement. Next slide. And then this also shows in our zero emission bus transition plan if we chose to go long-term planning for only fuel cell battery electric buses. And all the numbers there, I don't need to get into it, but this is truly following our bus replacement plan that is in our TAM plan. So again, we did not want to defer from what we are doing right now for our useful life benchmarking. And speaking of useful life benchmarking, we are so brand new into battery electric buses that we are still assigning them the same useful life, the UOB number, until something can tell us different, if that makes sense. The gaps you see there is just from earlier procurement years and funding sources. So that gap we are aware of, and that's just part of our, it meets our bus replacement plan. Next slide. So to do that, and I know that Nathan had mentioned this as well, we do, at our campus, we do have some undeveloped land. We are fortunate enough to have that space to accommodate a stationary fueling station that we are looking at. Right now, we are in very early design and engineering right now at conceptual to place that in our undeveloped land. We have a lot of concurrent projects going on at the same time. So it is of extreme importance to us that we install this stationary fueling station in the right location, meeting our footprint. Again, for long-term planning, because we are pushing ahead with the stationary fueling station. It will be liquid hydrogen delivered, but we're also looking at gaseous deliveries as well. We've been in very close contacts with the H2 Northwest Network that Joe Clark is spearheading. We've also been in very close relations with Bonneville Environmental Foundation in their efforts, and also Gary Olson up at Douglas County in his efforts for producing green hydrogen in the northeast side of the state. So our plan is to obviously put in the hydrogen fueling station to support those fuel cell buses coming in, but we also have to have the suppliers in line and in place before we actually get those buses delivered. The nearest location right now to get it trucked in is in Sacramento, California. And I've been recently told right now for gray hydrogen, which it is not advantageous for us, but for gray hydrogen deliveries, you're talking in the $20, $22 kilogram cost. So again, our efforts is to, for the long-term planning, look for those renewable resources to production sites to be developed here in the Northwest, where we do have some clean energy to get that hydrogen supply locally to really reduce the cost. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick footprint, and I'll wrap it up here very quickly. So there's a lot of different construction going on at our site, and this is also part of the zero emission bus transition plan, is to take a look at what infrastructure you need to develop, the cost that you're going to incur based on that, and any other type of concurrent projects that may be going on simultaneously. Again, for that interdisciplinary type of planning, there's a lot of different stakeholders involved, not just internal, but also external as well. Next slide. And again, our transition plan includes our workforce development. Next slide. And just run through these really quick, Jeff. We also, in our zero emission bus transition plan, did put in the capital expenditures and then operating expenditures for these types of zero emission vehicles, both for the near term, and then the next slide will be for the long term. Next slide. So in conclusion, we did introduce 10 BEVs. I can tell you in June, we are averaging 1.81 kilowatts per mile, which really surprised us. So kudos to our training department and our operations staff. We are regenerating 30% energy as they're driving, which equates to better economy. We continue to apply for state and federal grants. The recent stations that we put in for our existing 10 battery electric buses were also state funded, and then the VW settlement funding for the 10 buses. Our workforce training is progressing. What I can tell you is 72 of our buses right now, we introduced hybrid technology back in 2008. And out of the 106 buses, 104 buses, 72 of those are hybrid. So our technicians and even our operators are used to the regenerative braking. Our technicians are used to battery electric technology. So that has been very advantageous for us that they have been introduced to that already. And we do, again, we're in the design project of the fueling station, and we do plan on procuring those 22 fuel cell buses and then reevaluate and assess of where we go from there. And I am finished.
Thank you very much to all of our presenters. We've been able, I think, to cover a lot of territory and answer some questions live. One question I had for the panel was, there's definitely the technology components, lessons learned. There's also, each of you, of course, touched on finances. These are some pretty big numbers. And I just want to make sure and note that maybe if Carly doesn't mind starting this one, there are trade-offs that every transit agency makes, that all agencies have to make trade-offs. Some money funding out there is specific to this transition from the federal government and other sources through the states. But could you speak a little bit to the role of maybe helping each of your executive teams and boards kind of think through funding trade-offs as to how much money to put towards transitioning and other needs, just like providing service on the street with operators?
Yeah, I can start out briefly. This is definitely something that King County Metro is thinking about. We're not just putting all our eggs in one basket in terms of especially capital investments. So we are, putting a good amount of our budget towards this zero emission transition. In addition to, we just won an FTA grant to help with that transition as well, which is a huge assistance. But we're also in the process of looking at expanding our system and expanding our service. And we think that that's a big part of reducing greenhouse gas emissions as well. So we're not in a position where we're kind of pausing on any kind of expansion while we transition our fleet. We recognize that we really need to kind of continue on both fronts. So it is a trade-off, and there's not limitless funding, but we're trying to push multiple efforts forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Tim, Tina, Nathan, anything to add to that or similar?
In agreement with Carly.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
very similar. Mm-hmm.
One other question that often comes up with transit agencies, initially many of you stated there are good policies in place kind of at the state level and even maybe in your region at your agency with exploring these vehicles in this transition. Have you had to do any surprising amount of kind of legwork of educating your leadership, or has that gone relatively smoothly so far for each of you? I don't know, Tina, if you don't mind starting this one. Has it been easy to work with your leadership to think about this transition?
It has, and they've been very encouraging, especially our board of commissioners. They want us to move, and in some ways, we have to educate them about the workforce and the needs of the agency. They're making some personal decisions on their own vehicle styles, and so then they bring that to us and want us to also follow in their decisions on vehicle types. So I'd say they're all in. They want us to go this way, and then we have to work with them and really help with the funding issues, and then also what we're learning about the vehicles on the road as well, and bring them along. But I think they're highly supportive.
Gotcha. Thank you. Want to touch on one question here really quick from Lisa, and then maybe pass it back over to Chi to close us out. I know we're at time. Good question about kind of takeaways from your perspectives for a city traffic engineer or ITS professional. Some of my thinking is a lot of this relies on not only what happens at the base, which is very interesting and challenging, but also what happens on the roadway at transit centers, maybe on the route. So I think one potential answer for that could be to really help play a role in proactively determining the public right-of-way spaces and transit centers. Does anyone have an add to that response real quick before we close back up with Chi?
I guess briefly, we're looking at putting in more layover charging, like you were mentioning, Jeff. And I think we're trying to think ahead more in terms of when someone's ripping up the roadway, can we put in conduit? Like how far in advance can we plan things out while the technology is changing? And if the batteries get bigger, do we need the layover charging? But we should still put things in while like roadways are being constructed. And so it's a balancing act, but as much as we can coordinate with other transportation projects going on, I think it can really improve the cost of these projects if the roadway's already open. So that's one of my thoughts.
Excellent. Thank you. I do see we're at time. I want to thank you all so much for signing on. Thank you to the presenters for sharing your lessons learned and your very honest take on the transition. So thank you all for joining us. I'll speak for Chi here, hopefully real quick, and just say thank you so much for joining, and we're happy to answer questions as well, afterwards via email and such. So thank you for your time today. We've really enjoyed it.